Hello again, George McNeely from Full Sail University in Winter Park, Florida, and we're talking ESPN, the case study. ESPN, the worldwide leader in sports, my employer for more than a decade. ESPN has a mission, and its mission statement reads, to serve fans wherever sports are watched, listened to, discussed, debated, read about, or played. ESPN also has a business objective, and you know from attending our classes and our online lectures what business objective ESPN has: to generate income, to generate shareholder wealth, to generate revenue. That's the objective of any business. In fact, ESPN generates more revenue for the Walt Disney Company than all the theme parks and cruise lines and merchandise combined. Let's talk about ESPN. It all started with a couple of trailers and a couple of satellite dishes in 1979 in Bristol, Connecticut, west of Hartford, Connecticut. And ESPN would connect with consumers. How did it connect with consumers? Let's take a look.
And then I'll get off his white horse and hand me a big diamond ring. And say, Stacy, I can't live without you.
And he's going to propose in a gondola. Butterflies all around us. So I met this really great gondola. It's coming. I think he's going to do it on our trip to Mexico.
So one of the brilliant things that ESPN did is it ran those commercials on other cable stations. So for example, you're at home with your sweetheart and you're watching a classic movie on AMC or on Turner Classic Movies or on Lifetime. And at the end of the commercial break, that promo for ESPN runs. You know that when the movie starts again, she's saying, "Don't you ever do that to me." And you're talking about how you want your proposal to be when you're getting married, perhaps. And you're thinking to yourself, I can't wait till this movie is over. So SportsCenter comes on. We're in your mind. We're top of mind. And we did so with a lot of humor and a lot of promos like this. Nothing beats an Arnold Palmer. Made by Arnold Palmer.
That was awesome. I know. Hey, there he is, the machine.
What are you talking about?
That's what they call it, right? Machine?
Not a machine.
The machine, right?
Guys. I'm not a machine, okay? I'm just a number.
Whatever. Not a machine.
Why didn't you eliminate them, Albert?
Shut up.
What a brilliant spot. Of course, my all-time favorite.
Checking in.
Name, please.
Michael Jordan.
Michael Jordan.
Michael Jordan, 8 o'clock?
Oh.
That's me.
Oh.
How you doing?
Really? Let's go.
So we're top of mind. That's what we are. ESPN, the case study. We run the commercials, the promos on all of the cross-channel, on the other cable channels. We buy rights to sporting events. We become indispensable. You know that when you moved into your apartment or your house and you called the cable company, you probably said something like I did. What is the least expensive package that gives me connectivity, such as broadband, and ESPN. We all consume ESPN. It's the number one channel perceived value by the cable operators. They know they sell more services because they offer ESPN on basic cable. So how did it all start?
I was at ESPN from prior to day one, actually, probably in the first 10 to 15 people to even know of its existence. And what a lot of people don't realize is that at the time was considered a really dumb idea. You know, who's going to watch 24 hours a day of sports? As everyone knows, the rest is kind of history. But it was that was a pure startup venture, and by the seat of our pants. I mean, it was. I would classify it as collective chaos, and the culture back in those days was really one of just getting up and on the air. The infancy of ESPN was sort of like being in the right place at the right time. It was, with the exception of WTBS and some text news services such as UPI and obviously HBO was in existence then. It was the first 24/7 niche channel that was genre specific. So all of those things kind of combined to sort of be like a tidal wave, if you will. The other thing that happened was, to the benefit of ESPN, was the fact that the cable business in 1979 had roughly 20 to 22 million subscribers. Today it's got close to 100 million. So not only did it get in on the ground floor, but it benefited from that huge explosive growth. I remember when I was a kid, in 1978, before I went to work at ESPN, I had no idea what cable was. So when ESPN started, it was the first of a series of channels, followed quickly by CNN, followed quickly by MTV, and then that sort of led the stampede of genre-specific 24/7 channels. Bill Rasmussen, the original founder of ESPN, told me one day that someday ESPN will have the NFL, Major League Baseball, and all of the major sports. And I remember distinctly looking at him and saying, "What are you nuts? That's not going to happen." He said, "Mark my words, that will happen." So he saw that vision. That's kind of the difference between a visionary and a functionary, right? A visionary sees things down the road that other people can't see. And he definitely saw that for ESPN as early as 1980. I would never have predicted a couple of things. I never would have predicted that ESPN would have 7 or 8 channels or however many they have now. And I never would have predicted that they would completely reinvent the sports business as we know it today. I mean, there's nothing in the sports business, the sports media business, that is not in some way, shape, or form an outgrowth of the development of ESPN. I would tell you that the one guy who really had the vision, really had the vision, was a guy who nobody really ever refers to in the ESPN story. And that's a fellow named Stu Evey. And nobody knows who Stu Evey is. Stu Evey was the vice president of diversified services for the Getty Oil Company in 1978. And it was Stu Evey who convinced the board of the Getty Oil Company that they should get involved in this thing known as ESPN. And had Stu not done that, we probably wouldn't be talking about somebody would have done all sports, obviously, but probably wouldn't have been that particular group with that particular name. And then Getty had the foresight, going back into the early days of ESPN, to bring on board Chet Simmons from NBC Sports. He was the former president of NBC Sports. And Chet Simmons brought in Scotty Connell, who was his right-hand person in terms of production and operations. And they brought with them a team of NBC people into Bristol. And that really built the network.
You may remember Chet Simmons as the United States Football League commissioner talking about Donald Trump in the ESPN 30 for 30 Small Potatoes Who Killed the USFL. Chet Simmons ran NBC Sports, went on to be the president of ESPN, and then left for the USFL, which only lasted about 3 years. So, how did ESPN do it? Well, they had a flagship franchise. What would that franchise have been? Think about it. Sports Center, from left to right, George Grand, Gail Gardner, Bob Lee, and from left to right in later years, of course, Chris Berman, Bob Lee again, and Dan Patrick when he was still with ESPN, celebrating their 20,000th episode of SportsCenter. I must tell you, we did a lot of celebrating at ESPN. The 10th anniversary of ESPN Deportes, the 15th anniversary of ESPN 2, etc., etc., etc. There was always something. We drove the media writers crazy with all of our news releases and our celebrations because ESPN has become part of the fabric and culture of sports fans. One of the cool things about the flagship franchise, as I refer to it, SportsCenter, is that you don't have to pay rights except for the music you might play, the bumps for production, and of course the video that you don't have rights to. And ESPN's been buying up the rights to many, many sports so that they've got plenty of video highlights to show you on all of the SportsCenter. In later years, in fact, I was helping to launch Daytime SportsCenter. We used to just have the 11 o'clock Eastern and the 1 o'clock Eastern shows, and then we would re-air them all night long until the next day when SportsCenter would kick up in the evening. Well, what would happen around 2009 is we launched Daytime SportsCenter with Hannah Storm and Sage Steele and Chris McKendry, and the rest is history. A lot of SportsCenter because you've got a lot of hours to fill on ESPN when you don't have live events going on. One thing that ESPN has done very well throughout its history has been growing leagues and growing brand recognition for itself and for its partners. It's a very, very coveted partnership to have ESPN devote its multimedia resources to your league. ESPN's most important relationship is the National Football League. And they started paying about $125 million a year for Sunday Night Football in the early 80s. And in later years, they're paying upwards of $2 billion a year for what's now Monday Night Football. They've created the NFL draft into the nomenclature of sports fans. The NFL used to have a rookie draft, just like any other league. ESPN would devote wall-to-wall coverage. The NFL would launch its own network. You'd have two networks covering the NFL draft. I would say the NFL draft gets as much coverage as the Republican and Democratic conventions. The NFL is ESPN's most important relationship, and it's clearly grown over the years into the national pastime in sports. The National Football League, 16 weeks of regular season, becomes a bigger deal than all of the long baseball and hockey and NBA seasons. To most sports fans, they recognize the NFL as the most popular sport. Don't think for a minute that ESPN hasn't had a say in that. ESPN would love to have the rights to the Masters golf tournament, but Augusta National isn't going to end a relationship that is approaching 60 years with CBS Sports on Saturday, Sunday. But when the Thursday-Friday rounds that were previously airing on USA Network became available in the mid-2000s, ESPN scooped them up. And they went to Augusta National with an offer they couldn't refuse. They said, look, we'll do Thursday and Friday rounds, and we'll use the CBS talent. And we'll have Mike Tirico, at the time our signature voice before he left for NBC Sports, and Butler Cabin. And we will cover the Wednesday Par 3 competition, the Monday, Tuesday practice rounds. We'll even have SportsCenter set up on Sunday night before Masters Week, when frankly all the attention should be on the Shell Houston Open on the PGA Tour. But everyone will be looking ahead to the Masters. Well, Augusta National jumped at that. Why would ESPN devote all of those resources to the Masters? Well, it's the toughest ticket in sports, and they also need tickets to the event to entertain their clients. ESPN has gobbled up a lot of media rights, and they grow their business with it, not only by serving the consumer by providing great sports content, which has you pay your cable or satellite bill on time and pay for your other platforms and amenities and services that ESPN might offer. You know, some networks you have to pay because they're not on basic cable in your area. So ESPN makes money that way. It also makes money through its advertisers and its cable rights fees that the cable systems pay ESPN, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But basically, they need sporting event tickets to entertain clients and for promotions and contests. And again, there's no more sought-after ticket than the Masters. So those are a couple of examples of how ESPN grows its business while growing buzz and attention for the sports that it cares for and nurtures. And don't think for a minute that CBS Sports doesn't love having ESPN there, because if ESPN's talking about the Masters all weekend, don't you think the ratings are going to go up on the weekend on CBS? You betcha. 1995 was a magical moment. My former bosses, Michael Eisner and the Big Cheese himself, the Walt Disney Company, purchased ESPN. And why did they purchase the ABC television network? Because ABC television owned 80% of ESPN. 20% was owned by Hearst Corporation and still is. And more than likely, Hearst will never sell ESPN. I know never is a big word, but think about it. They make more money off of their 20% of ESPN than they do on all of their print interests, I'm certain. Hearst Corporation has owned 20% of ESPN since its inception. 80% was owned by the Getty Oil Company, which sold to ABC Television and what was Capital Cities. And then in 1995, ABC Television Capital Cities sold the ABC Television Network and with it ESPN to the Walt Disney Company. At the time, people were saying, Eisner, why would you possibly buy a New York-based network with all of the union contracts with talent and all of the owned and operated stations in the big markets that cost a lot of money to operate, Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., etc.? Well, here's his quote. We spent the $19 billion because we wanted ESPN, said former Disney CEO Michael Eisner. That is a powerful, powerful statement. Many credit him with the turnaround of the Walt Disney Company. The theme park business in the 80s was looking at a couple of hostile takeovers on the stock exchange, and he created new revenue streams that the Walt Disney Company had never dreamed of through media networks led by ESPN. And what he saw was dual revenue streams. What do we mean by dual revenue streams? Well, traditional advertising that all the networks have, broadcast and cable, as illustrated by the Budweiser Tree Frogs. That was a great commercial back then. And your cable or satellite fees that you pay every month gladly to keep ESPN. So let's do a little bit of math. Just a little. It is a business class. Let's say that the average person pays about $7 a month of their cable bill that goes directly to ESPN from the cable company. Well, if you multiply that by 100 million households, that's $700 million a month, $1.4 billion every 2 months. About $8-9 billion a year that ESPN is making just on the lower right hand of your screen, the cable and satellite boxes. That doesn't count the other billions they get on advertising. ESPN is a cash cow for the Walt Disney Company. What is the objective of any business? To generate shareholder wealth, to make money, to generate revenue. And ESPN has been printing revenue for years, printing money. Traditional advertising plus subscriber fees has been a winning formula for ESPN. Okay? Cable operators love to have ESPN, but they hate to pay for it. According to beta cable operator surveys, these are the people who send surveys to the Bright House, the Time Warner, the Cox, the Xfinity cable systems. According to those surveys, every year ESPN ranks number 1 in perceived value. And who do you think ranks number 2 of all the cable channels? Well, yeah. You know why? It's really simple. You have channel adjacency. Here in Central Florida, ESPN's on channel 29, ESPN's on channel 30. They're right next to each other. If you don't like the sports programming on 1, you go to 2. If you don't like it on 2, you go to 1 with one click. That channel adjacency really pays off, as much as the fact that over the years, ESPN2 is no longer a dumping ground, but has equally good programming. They used to use ESPN2 to put content on that didn't quite make it up to ESPN standards. Maybe they'd have NFL on ESPN and they might have poker on ESPN2, or they might have Australian rules football or something like that. Well, now they might have the Michigan Notre Dame game on ESPN, and they might have the Georgia Wisconsin game on ESPN2. And if you're a Wisconsin fan, which one are you going to watch? Equally good programming.
The dual revenue stream is fundamentally the differentiator between the broadcast network and the cable network. And it kind of came about in many ways by accident. Actually, maybe not by accident, but I can tell you, the early days of ESPN, we were really interested in getting distribution, getting on cable systems, getting access to their homes, because the original revenue model was going to be that of a broadcast network, going to be strictly advertiser-supported. Matter of fact, I believe that in the early days, my memory is correct, we actually paid cable operators to carry us. In 1980, Getty Oil Company, which was the original funder of ESPN, hired the McKinsey Company, big management consulting firm, to come in and sort of evaluate this cable thing they had going. And it was the people of McKinsey, I believe, who said, you really should be charging for this. Because the cable operators were going to take the ESPN content. They were going to charge their subscribers for it, right? So they're getting paid, so you might as well get paid. And there launched the entire dual revenue stream, which is completely reinvented the entire sports world as we know it, because it gave ESPN, over the course of time, didn't happen overnight, but it gave ESPN over the course of time a playing field that was distinctly tilted to their advantage, because they had significantly more revenue coming in. There was guaranteed. They'd allowed them to go out and bid on sports, produce more sports, bid on additional rights, up the ante, if you will, to the rights. And that money was coming in from the cable operator every month, regardless of what ESPN did. It's sort of like an annuity. And it really fundamentally changed the landscape, and for the entire sports business, quite frankly. In the short term, I don't think the sports marketplace is going to change. Short term being the next 12 to 24 months, I don't think we're going to see too much of a structural change per se in that time frame. I think we are in 5 to 7 years. And I say that because the consumer is changing. I think we're going to see a marketplace correction, but I think it could take one of two or three different forms. I think form number one is everything goes a la carte. Chuck Dolan has been a big proponent of the everything a la carte model for the last 10 years, and Chuck is usually about 20 years ahead of the rest of us. But he has always been a big proponent of the pure, straight a la carte carriage syndrome. I can tell you that the economics of that fundamentally don't work for a lot of networks unless they get creatively packaged, etc. The other thing I think that could be very interesting to see happen is whether the cable companies end up continuing to offer that huge amount of channels. Or do they take the lower rated channels and just slowly drop them off of the channel spectrum and at the same time reduce the price, but raise the price for your broadband connection. So there's kind of a teeter-totter effect. I think at some point, if the sports leagues are not careful, and if the sports programmers are not careful, they're going to have the government get involved. And I'm not sure we're really far away from that happening at the present time. I think in this economy, we sit in 2012, we've been in since 2008. It's really difficult for the average consumer to understand why athletes are getting paid these exorbitant salaries. And a lot of them really don't understand that those exorbitant salaries are coming from their cable bill. That's really where they're coming from. At the end of the day, they're paying the exorbitant salaries. Now, I don't have any problem with people making what they can make, and that's the American way. But when you have people who are unconsciously paying for that, that's not the American way. And I'll put it into a consumer analogy for you. It fundamentally, the way the cable business is set up today is like going to the grocery store. And you want to go to the grocery store and you want to buy milk and eggs. That's all you need is milk and eggs. But before you're allowed to leave the grocery store, you got to buy wine, you got to buy butter, you got to buy vegetables, you got to buy yogurt, you got to buy hamburgers, you got to buy all this stuff that you don't need, that you don't want before you're allowed to leave the grocery store. And fundamentally, that's what the television business has become, is kind of that analogy. But the consumer, a lot of them don't understand that.
What a great point by Jim Bates, who I should tell you was the 13th employee ever hired at ESPN, went on to an extremely successful executive role with the Golf Channel, and now builds cable networks around the country, cable systems around the world, actually. My late father used to say, I have more channels than I ever dreamed I would have, but there's nothing on TV. Boy, there's a lot of truth there. When there were less networks, they paid better attention to programming. Now you can flip around and possibly not find anything that appeals to you, and you can have 100 channels or more. ESPN takes great care to put the most important sports there because they want to remain on basic cable and be a very important part of your life and generate the revenue that they're accustomed to generating. Who's got next? Well, I would think Comcast. You remember Comcast, the cable company based in Philadelphia, bought NBC Universal, and with it, the Versus Network, which it rebranded to NBC Sports Network. A lot of hockey on those networks. Comcast already owned Golf Channel and co-branded it with NBC. They've got Telemundo for the Spanish-speaking audience. They've got Bravo, MSNBC for news and commentary, and CNBC for business news and commentary. Why do I mention those networks? Because every one of these networks was used for the Olympics. Multi-platform approach. Who'd they learn that from? Oh, ESPN, ESPN2, ESPN News, ESPN Deportes, and so on and so on and so on. Who else has next? Because they all want a piece of that revenue. Certainly News Corp, the owners of Fox. They took the former Speed Channel a few years ago and rebranded it to Fox Sports 1. They've got Sky TV in the UK. I see them out on the PGA Tour all the time, interviewing the golfers of European heritage. And on the big name Americans, the Jordan Spieths, the Rory McIlroys, the Tiger Woods, even though Tiger hadn't been playing as much. Fox News Channel and Fox Business. What prevents News Corp from doing the same thing that NBC did with the Olympics? The bottom line is, when we talk about all of the money that ESPN is generating to its bottom line, Comcast and News Corp have invested heavily in sports too and would like to get a return on investment. Cable systems are going to have to make a decision one of these days. Do they go a la carte and make us all pay for what we consume? Or do they tell ESPN, we can't give you that full amount anymore because Comcast is offering really good programming, and News Corp is, we have to take the money we have budgeted for sports and divide it equally among the three? That could fundamentally change the way ESPN has been able to do business. They've been playing in a league of their own, not so much anymore. They've lost subscribers over the years. They've had to lay off some people. Some large roles are no longer there. They're becoming leaner. They're in competition. There's still a lot of jobs, and there's jobs at 3 sports networks as opposed to 1. That's good for all of us, right?
The Comcast NBC acquisition is interesting in a number of factors. First off, Comcast as its core business is a distributor, and they have been buying programming to distribute from all of these other programmers for all those many years, right? So now when they buy NBC, they already had E and Style. They had Golf. They had some of their smattering of regional sports networks. Well, when they buy NBC, now they end up with the NBC television network, right? They end up with CNBC, MSNBC, Bravo. The list goes on. So now they go from this little kind of group of content to this massive programming company, for lack of a better description. Well, how do you get that program? You get it through Comcast core business. So that really was a supporting element to their core business of cable distribution. The other thing is a proliferation of internet programming comes down the pike, which is going to happen. Comcast is the pipe, right? I mean, they fundamentally, that's their bread and butter, is that pipe. That's the conduit to picking up the programming, no matter how it's distributed. So the reason for doing that made all of the sense in the world, because now they have something really that ESPN doesn't have. And they have this family of regional networks. They have the old Versus channel, which they've rebranded into NBC Sports Network, which is available in 80+ million homes. Then they have the Golf channel. So they have this smattering of sports programming. It's really not a smattering. It's actually a pretty good, comprehensive group of programming networks that they can share content with. It'll be interesting to see how quickly they get some of the regionals go from being called Comcast Sportsnet to NBC Sportsnet, Chicago, NBC Sportsnet, San Francisco, etc. I wouldn't be surprised if that's the next shoe to drop. NBC's utilization of CNBC, there are other networks, NBC Sports Network, for the telecasting of the Olympic programming. That only benefits the consumer. And it's a stroke of genius, number one, because you have the outlets to be able to put additional programming on. The consumer benefits because back in my youth, you had one network that had the Olympics, and they generally showed from 8 o'clock at night to 11 o'clock at night, prime time. Whatever it was that they wanted to show, that's what you saw. Well, now, as a consumer, you get to see whatever programming is available on whatever network you have access to, and it generally is 3, 4, or 5 networks. So it really benefits the consumer at the end of the day. It also allows Comcast to, quite frankly, spread across its rights fee. It's one thing to pay a rights fee for a broadcast network 3 hours a night. It's another thing to pay rights fee for all of these other networks. So it allows them to make their money back as well. I was not too surprised to see the way NBC embraced the digital platform and the multi-screen approach. The consumer fundamentally wants to watch what they want to watch, when they want to watch it, on the best available screen for them to watch it on. And Comcast or NBC gave them that approach with the Olympics. The fact that it's 5 hours ahead of us, you had the ability to watch that live on your tablet or your computer or your phone, depending upon where you were, whether you were riding the subway, whether you were sitting on a park bench. You had the ability to watch that in the afternoon hours when it was actually taking place in the evening hours over in London in the afternoon hours here. So it was the real-time effect. And I just think that's smart business because it is clearly the wave of the future.
Great comments from Jim Bates to add context to what we're talking about. So let's talk distribution and co-branding. You're watching ESPN on ABC. That was so confusing when we first started saying that on TV. Hi, I'm Brent Musburger, along with Kirk Herbstreit, and you're watching ESPN on ABC. What does that mean? Well, what they're basically saying is that ESPN owns the rights to the Indianapolis 500, but it's airing on ABC, and it's been branded as an ESPN production. All of the pit reporters are in ESPN flame-retardant fire suits. The guys in the booth and the studio host, she's holding a microphone with an ESPN mic flag on it. See, in the mid-2000s, then ESPN president, my former boss, George Bodenheimer, made a pitch to Bob Iger, the chairman of the Walt Disney Company, that they closed down ABC Sports, the venerable network that you have heard about that launched Monday Night Football and did all the Olympic coverage in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, was no more. Roone Arledge, the late Roone Arledge, who ran ABC Sports into one of the most profitable, dynamic ventures in the history of television, ABC Sports does not exist. Everything is branded ESPN on the ABC television network. And I'll give you some background on that. You basically had a situation where if the rights to the Indianapolis 500 came up, ESPN was bidding against its sister network, ABC, both owned by the Walt Disney Company. That doesn't make sense. ESPN's got enough competition with Fox and NBC and CBS. Doesn't need to compete against itself. Then the other thing, if we think of broadcast TV as free TV, back before everything went digital, you could put a pair of rabbit ears, they used to call them, or an antenna on the side of your house, and you could watch TV for free. That really doesn't exist anymore. You really need a cable or a satellite hookup unless you go totally cordless. Regardless, what you have is a situation where ESPN needs the best quality program so it can keep charging the cable companies who can keep charging you, so it can keep being profitable and meet its business objective of generating shareholder wealth. ESPN is not making that money if they're quote-unquote giving it away on free TV or broadcast TV. Another interesting story is that other than the NBA Finals, the Little League World Series, and the Indy 500, ESPN has migrated most of its marquee properties from ABC to ESPN, or it stopped paying for the rights altogether, as it did with the British Open. It's about profitability, and it's about decisions on what will keep feeding the beast, if you will. Think of ESPN as an enormous profit center. It needs to be fed with programming so that you're satisfied or ecstatic or somewhere in between, and you keep paying your cable bill and they keep getting paid. Now, I remember playing a round of golf with some friends on the Sunday afternoon before an early week announcement that Comcast was buying NBC, and a few days later they did. We just talked about all of the networks that Comcast and ESPN have. And I said to the folks we were golfing with, all of them worked in media and marketing, I said, how long do you think it will be for it to be co-branded, such as Golf Channel on NBC or Golf on NBC? And folks said, oh, a couple of months, they're going to just like ESPN and ABC. Would you believe that that weekend, within just a couple of days, they were ready to roll? And you had the big G for Golf Channel and the Peacock next to it, and Dan Hicks and Johnny Miller were wearing shirts with both logos. And what happened there? They were able to take their most visible platform, NBC Sports, and promote Comcast cable property, Golf Channel. It's a marriage made in heaven, if you will. You have a situation where when NBC is doing the U.S. Open at the time, or a golf major, they can have a pregame show, or they called it a pregame show. It's really a pre-round show, pre-round 3 and pre-round 4, where Golf Channel talent that's already on site earning a salary can produce a show that airs on NBC, and you get to elevate the stature of Golf Channel on the big network, if you will, the broadcast network, and you also get to utilize all of your people to create more programming and cross-promotion for your Golf Channel brand. And what does that do? That helps everything with Comcast. You'll watch NBC Sports coverage of golf, and you'll see promos for Golf Now, the online Golf Channel tee time seller. If you want to buy a foursome for a golf course, you go to Golf Now. And that's owned by Comcast and promoted on sister network NBC. That's what we're talking about when we talk about distribution and co-branding. Okay? So when we look at ESPN in 2016, heading into 2017, you've got ESPN, the mothership, the original, often imitated, so far not duplicated. You've got ESPN2, channel adjacency, the channel right next door in most all markets. You've got ESPNU as in university for college sports, ESPN Classic, ESPN News, ESPN Deportes for the Spanish-speaking audience within the United States. You've got ESPNW, all of the women's programming under one umbrella. And ESPN has really led the charge in women's sports when you think about all of the basketball coverage and tennis and other things to showcase the great athletes, golf. ESPN.com, of course. ESPN3.com. Kind of arrogant. ESPN, ESPN2 makes sense. They're TV channels. Well, they branded their online video as ESPN3, as if it's another network. Well, guess what? It is another network because you and I consume a lot of programming and information digitally. It's a digital network. It's brilliant. ESPN Audio. It's no longer just ESPN Radio. Think about all the audio that's captured on television and repurposed on digital platforms like ESPN.com and ESPN3.com and podcasts and so on. ESPN the magazine. I personally think if ESPN wasn't making so much money from the cable systems, it would be long out of the magazine business because magazines are hardly profitable these days. But that's how it's looking at ESPN. And then you've got 47 international networks. That's right. They're distributing programming for other networks that they don't own. Absolutely a brilliant case study. I do want to re-emphasize something before we move on. Think about the Walt Disney Company. You've got the 4 theme parks in Florida, 2 water parks, Disney Springs, resorts and hotels, cruise line, consumer merchandise, Pixar, Marvel, Star Wars, and at present ESPN accounts for more than half of all the revenue that the Walt Disney Company generates. Certainly Star Wars is huge and could help turn that around. But it does seem disproportionate when you think about all of the things associated with the Disney logo, the Disney brand, Mickey Mouse, etc., and that ESPN and its media networks generate more than half of all the revenue. But that's the power of media, this business that you chose. So let's talk about a what if. What if the referee, in the form of Congress, decides to throw the flag and change the rules? What is ESPN's greatest strength? No, not SportsCenter. No, not the programming, although that's very, very important. Both are. Its greatest strength is that it generates revenue. It's a cash cow. It has dual revenue streams, all the things we've talked about. Its business objective is to generate shareholder wealth, and it does so splendidly. But what if that referee in the form of Congress changes the rules? Could ESPN's greatest strength, generating revenue, become its greatest weakness? Chuck Dolan was referenced in one of the interview snippets with Jim Bates. Chuck Dolan is a billionaire, the founder of Cablevision and HBO in the early days of cable. Through super voting shares, Dolan controls Cablevision, AMC networks, and the Madison Square Garden Company. You know, Knicks, Rangers, Madison Square Garden, Cablevision in New York and all over. Why do I raise this? Because he's a guy who's a proponent of a la carte. What does a la carte mean? Well, if you go to Golden Corral, those Jeff Foxworthy commercials, and you pay one fee, you get to eat everything you want. That's kind of like the way the cable system is. You heard Jim Bates say you go to the grocery store and you just want a couple of items, but you got to fill a whole cart. That's what the economics of cable TV is and satellite TV. You get satellite because you want ESPN, but you have to pay for all the other channels through your fee. You're subsidizing channels you don't even watch. You heard Jim talk about that. Well, we also have a situation where Congress could legislate that things go a la carte. You get what you pay for. Why, if you're not a sports fan, do you have to pay for ESPN? If you're not a sports fan, why should you have to subsidize a channel you're not watching? Now that would turn the cable industry spinning around, turn it on its head, because you would have a situation where a lot of the smaller networks wouldn't survive. ESPN would survive, but it would be a very different landscape. And it could end up being like that. It currently exists with HBO, with Showtime, with Stars. If you want those channels, you have to pay extra. Why should sports be different? Well, you might say because we have a right to our sports. Well, yeah. I didn't see that anywhere in the Constitution. And those people who work in the right-hand side of your screen on Capitol Hill can change things with the stroke of a pen and a presidential bill. Not that I think they're going to amend the Constitution over cable TV, but it does seem unfair that you have to pay for things you don't watch. I do watch sports. I don't mind paying for it. I don't think my family could live without the SEC, and I certainly couldn't without Golf Channel and the football. No question. Onward we go. An interview with CNBC and the current president of ESPN, the guy who replaced George Bodenheimer, a guy named John Skipper.
ESPN is the highest, it has the highest priced network in all of cable by a long shot. How can you continue to raise prices? Do you still have room to raise prices?
We have the highest value in the pay television by far. The things are connected. We get a per month sub fee commensurate with the value we bring. And sports is clearly preeminent in attracting an audience to pay television. It's by far the favorite network among men, and in fact was the #1 cable network among adults.
But sports content costs continue to rise. How are you going to continue to manage these costs? Can you pass rising costs along to cable companies?
We've been at this for 32 years, and while there's a lot of attention paid right now to rising programming costs, they have risen fairly consistently over 30 years. We are very disciplined about what we can pay to acquire rights. They are increasing because sports value is increasing because it's the only thing you have to watch live. 99.4% of viewing on ESPN is live, and it's unique content. You can't knock off the Rose Bowl or Sunday Night Baseball or Monday Night Football. They're preeminent cable properties that have great value.
They are preeminent cable properties, not television properties, not sports properties, not your property or my property. Cable properties, because the basis of ESPN's business are the cable and satellite subscription fees. Very interesting when you listen to those interviews. They offer live programming, and they perpetuate an industry that could be changing. Could be changing for the better or the worse, depending on how you look at it. Well, that's a look at ESPN, the case study. If you have any questions, reach out, and we'll talk soon. From Full Sail University in Winter Park, Florida, I'm George McNeely.